The morning mist clung stubbornly to St. Peter's Square as the world held its breath. Among the rigid lines of the Swiss Guard, one figure stirred. Sergeant Adrian Weiss, 42 years old, solemn beneath the plume of his Mauryan helmet. His polished boots struck the ancient stones with a sound that shattered the sacred silence. From where I stood, a mere shadow among the mourners, I saw it. The tremor in his hand, the fierce resolve in his eyes. Something profound was about to unfold, and none of us could stop it. Long before the polished armor and crisp salutes, Adrian Weiss had been just a boy. A fragile shadow moving through the gray corridors of an orphanage on the outskirts of Lucerne. It was a place where winter seeped into the bones and kindness was rationed like bread. I remember him then, though he never saw me. A wiry figure pressing his forehead to rain-speckled glass, watching the world beyond with a longing too heavy for his small frame. One night, fire broke loose in the dormitories, a hungry, howling thing that clawed through the ancient timbers. Amid the screams and the choking smoke, Adrian tried. God knows, he tried. I can still see his thin arms hammering against a locked door, the smears of soot across his face, the raw terror in his eyes as the flames swallowed everything he loved. They pulled him out at dawn, coughing blood and silence. His right hand was broken. His spirit, something deeper still, fractured in ways no doctor could mend. He never spoke of it afterward, but something hardened in him that day. A vow woven into the marrow of his bones. A vow that, one day, when it mattered most, he would not stand still. And today, in the solemn chill of St. Peter's Square, I saw that boy, grown now, armored now, finally honor that silent promise. The square seemed to tighten around him as Sergeant Adrian Weiss advanced. One deliberate step, then another, each footfall echoing sharply off the marble stones. Around him, the sea of mourners stiffened, breaths drawn but not released, as if the entire world teetered on the edge of a single, fragile moment. I watched from the shadows beneath the colonnade, feeling the tremor in the very air. Adrian reached the simple cypress coffin resting beneath the open sky. No golden ornamentation adorned it, only a white papal flag draped across its surface, the keys of St. Peter embroidered at the center. Slowly, reverently, Adrian removed a folded letter from the hidden pocket of his tunic. His gloved fingers shook, just slightly, as he laid the parchment atop the flag, positioning it directly beneath the wooden crucifix. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Even the mist seemed to pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, Adrian bowed his head. Cheapo. Trembling motion, before stepping back with military precision. It took only seconds. Yet in those seconds, a current stronger than tradition itself swept through St. Peter's Square. Some faces turned away in disapproval. Others watched with a glimmer of something like awe. But from where I stood, hidden yet bearing witness, I understood. This was no breach of duty. This was duty fulfilled, to a deeper covenant, older than any man-made law. If you believe that small acts of courage can ripple through history, join our journey by subscribing to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Adrian's place? Share your reflections in the comments below. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a final, hollow thud. Inside the chamber, beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, Adrian Weiss stood alone before three figures cloaked in the black and scarlet authority of the Swiss Guard High Council. Their faces were stern, carved from duty itself. No charges were read aloud. No need. The silence between them was heavier than accusation. Commandant Reinhardt, a man who had once praised Adrian's flawless discipline, now regarded him with a mixture of sorrow and iron resolve. "You moved," he said simply, his voice scraping like stone across stone. "I did," Adrian answered, his chin lifted, yet not in defiance. "What you did was seen by millions," another counselor murmured. "Yes, it cannot go unanswered." Outside the high windows, the bells of St. Peter's tolled a slow, mournful dirge. I watched from the shadows, an unseen soul among the stone, feeling the war within him. Duty to the guard. Duty to something older, harder to define. After a long pause, the commandant spoke again. "You will be reassigned. You will not stand upon the square again." Adrian bowed his head, accepting the verdict without protest. Punishment? Perhaps. But in his quiet acceptance, I glimpsed something stronger than rebellion. The silent triumph of a man who had dared to place compassion above custom, and would bear the cost without flinching. The corridors of the apostolic archives swallowed him whole. Gone were the gleaming plumes and ceremonial halberds. In their place, Adrian Weiss now wore a simple black tunic, indistinguishable from the scholars and clerks who wandered among the towering shelves of history. Here, amid parchments brittle with age and tomes heavy with forgotten wisdom, Adrian found a different kind of service. One not measured by the sharpness of his salute or the polish of his armor, but by the steadfastness of his silence. I often glimpsed him moving through the labyrinthine halls, a solitary figure tracing the edges of ancient worlds. His step was lighter now, though his shoulders still bore the invisible weight of what had passed. Some would have called it exile, punishment. But from where I watched, hidden in the half-light, it seemed more a consecration. Among these stones, where the voices of centuries whispered against the vaulted ceilings, Adrian's quiet fidelity found new roots. Not in grand ceremonies, nor in roaring crowds, but in the steady, unwavering choice to remember and to honor, even when the world no longer watched. In the hush of the archives, he was no less a guardian than he had ever been. Only now, he guarded something deeper still, the memory of a promise fulfilled. One late afternoon, as the golden light spilled like honey across the manicured lawns of the Vatican gardens, I saw him again. Adrian Weiss sat alone on a low stone bench, the simple black of his tunic blending into the shadows. In his hands, a worn notebook rested, though he was not writing, merely holding it as one might hold a fragile memory. From across the path, a boy approached, no longer a child, but not yet a man. His cadet uniform, still stiff with newness, marked him as one of the Swiss Guard trainees. His stride faltered as he drew near, hesitation battling resolve. Adrian looked up, and for a long moment, the two simply regarded each other, a bridge of silence stretching between them. Finally the boy spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "I saw you that day." Adrian said nothing, but his gaze softened, inviting the boy to continue. "You moved when everyone else stood still," the boy whispered. "Because you knew it was right." Adrian's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. A small, sacred thing. No lectures followed, no grand pronouncements. Instead, Adrian reached out and gently pressed the notebook into the boy's hands. A quiet blessing, passed from one soul to another. And as the bells of St. Peter's began to toll the vespers, I understood. A legacy, once forged in fire and silence, was being handed onward, unseen, but indelible. The seasons turned with quiet dignity in the Vatican gardens, and Adrian Weiss moved with them, a steady, unobtrusive presence among the whispering olives and sun-warmed stones. He no longer wore the proud plumes of the guard, nor did he stand sentinel beneath the soaring columns of St. Peter's Basilica. Instead, he became part of the very fabric of the city, a familiar figure to those who paid attention, and invisible to those who did not. I watched him often from the periphery of the bustling squares and silent cloisters. There was a gentleness to him now, not weakness, but a tempered strength, like iron cooled in sacred water. He tended the neglected corners of the gardens, straightened a fallen plaque, set a lost bird back upon a branch. No one commanded him to do these things. No ceremonies marked his quiet devotions. Yet through these small acts, Adrian continued his service, not to crown or country, but to the eternal heart of what those things were meant to represent. And in the hush between bells, in the golden hush before vespers, I sometimes glimpsed it, the faintest echo of a man who had once dared to move when standing still would have been easier. A reminder that sometimes history is written not by those who march to trumpets, but by those who kneel in silence. It was in the quiet hush of an early spring morning that I saw him again. Not Adrian this time, but the boy, now fully grown, wearing the ceremonial uniform of the Swiss Guard. His step was sure, yet there was a certain reverence in the way he approached the solitary figure tending the olive trees near the old cloister wall. Adrian, older now, with silver threaded through his hair, looked up as the young man halted before him. No words were spoken for a moment. The morning light stretched long and golden between them. Then, with a precision born of deep emotion, the young guard snapped to attention and offered a salute. Not the rigid formality drilled into cadets, but something gentler, almost sacred. Adrian responded not with a salute, but with a slow, understanding nod. "I never forgot," the young man said quietly. "You taught me that moving, when it matters, is the truest form of loyalty." A small, tired smile touched Adrian's lips. No grand speeches were exchanged. None were needed. I stood hidden among the shadows, witnessing not just a meeting of two men, but the passing of something rarer still. A silent torch, lit not by ambition but by the steadfast glow of a promise kept. And in that moment, the Vatican itself seemed to hold its breath, honoring the bond that would never be broken. The years ebbed away, soft and inexorable, like the tides of the Tiber beneath the ancient bridges of Rome. Adrian Weiss grew older, but he did not wither. His frame grew thinner, perhaps, and his steps slower, but his spirit, that indomitable flame, burned with a steady, quiet radiance. He spent his final days much as he had spent the ones before, tending the gardens, assisting in the archives, offering small acts of service so gentle that most never noticed. Yet those who looked carefully saw the depth in his silences, the strength in his patience. No grand titles adorned him. No promotions were pinned to his breast. But from where I stood, still watching, still remembering, it was clear that he had achieved something far rarer. A life shaped not by ambition, but by fidelity to a deeper truth. When the end came, it came softly. A simple bench beneath the olive trees, the spring breeze stirring the leaves overhead, the distant bells of St. Peter's sounding the evening Angelus. There, without ceremony, Adrian slipped quietly into the great silence beyond, as he had lived, without seeking attention, without regret. And though no trumpets blared, no statues were raised, something unseen yet enduring took root that day. The memory of a man who chose, again and again, to move for the right reasons. Even when the world insisted he stand still. In the quiet days that followed Adrian Weiss's passing, something subtle yet unmistakable stirred within the walls of the Vatican. The young Swiss guard, the one who had once stood trembling before the man who dared to move, now walked the marble corridors with a steadiness that owed itself to more than training. I watched him, as I had watched Adrian, silent, unseen. He led with humility, spoke with measured words, and listened more often than he commanded. When he saluted, it was not merely to obey, but to honor the spirit behind the uniform. And when moments of quiet moral choice arose, and they always did, in ways both large and small, I saw him hesitate just long enough to remember, then act with a conviction, born not from regulations, but from something deeper. Others, too, began to notice. There was a slight softening in the ranks, a quiet courage that threaded itself through the ancient rituals and stone cloisters, not diminishing discipline but infusing it with humanity. No official speeches marked the change, no decrees were issued. Yet the shift was real as the bells that tolled each evening across St. Peter's Square. Adrian's legacy had not been written in books or carved in marble. It lived, silently, stubbornly, in the choices of those he had quietly inspired. And in that, perhaps, he had changed the Vatican more profoundly than he had ever dared to dream. Centuries will pass, and the marble floors of St. Peter's Basilica will be worn smooth by countless feet yet to come. The Swiss Guard will continue to stand, stoic and resplendent, a living symbol of fidelity to the Holy See. Rituals will repeat, uniforms will change hands, names will fade into dusty ledgers. But some things, the most important things, are not written in official histories. They live, instead, in the unseen spaces between ceremonies, in the choice to act when silence would be easier, in the subtle nod shared between two guards across a crowded square, in the quiet courage that refuses to be extinguished, even when the world demands stillness. I remain here still, an unseen witness beneath the ancient arches. And sometimes, in the hush just before the Angelus bells, I hear it, faint but sure. The echo of a single pair of footsteps breaking the ranks. The world did not record Adrian Weiss's name in marble. It did not carve his story into gold leaf or trumpet it across the heavens. But in every act of quiet bravery, in every moment when conviction outweighs comfort, his spirit moves still, unseen, but utterly indelible. And that, I think, is the truest immortality of all. Is the truest. In a world that often rewards noise and spectacle, Adrian Weiss's story reminds us that true strength lies in quiet acts of courage. Loyalty is not measured by rigid obedience to tradition, but by the wisdom to know when compassion must come first. His life teaches us that even when no one is watching, when there are no medals, no applause, the choices we make echo beyond our own time. As we grow older, it becomes ever clearer. The legacies that endure are not those carved in marble, but those etched gently into the hearts of others. In small, unseen moments of kindness, of standing firm for what is right, we pass on something far greater than fame. We pass on hope. And perhaps, in doing so, we achieve a kind of immortality no time can erase.